We have some news out of Stellantis, and not only is this not great news for the company, but I also predict that we will see some major shakeups with Stellantis in the next 12 to 24 months. As you all know, Stellantis has had a rough last 12 to 18 months. After slumping sales across the Stellantis umbrella, Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares abruptly resigning late last year, and as a result, the company has been sort of in a state of limbo ever since. Now, for those of you who may not be as familiar with Stellantis as a company and some of the drama associated with it, Stellantis was founded in 2021 when FCA, the group, merged with PSA, bringing together 14 brands including Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, Alfa Romeo, Fiat, Maserati, Abarth, Lancia, and more, creating one of the largest automakers in the entire world and bringing brands across the world together under one umbrella. So Carlos Tavares, the CEO who resigned late last year, he was actually the first CEO for Stellantis, the company. He was put into place after the merger and ultimately resigned due to differences with the board about the future of the company. But in the midst of sales slumps and CEO resignations, there was also discussions mid last year of the possibility of Stellantis cutting out one or some of their many brands under their umbrella. But then just a few months later, in the fall of 2024, Stellantis denied any discussions of cutting these brands. And then, well, a few months after that, Carlos Tavares, the CEO, resigned, and we haven't really heard a whole lot about much ever since then, except for the reported improvements of their massive inventory problem, which was achieved at the end of 2024, which to Stellantis' credit is a big deal and is something that they looked at achieving in Q4 of 2024, and it does look as though they did that successfully. But as far as discussions of new CEOs, cutting of brands, mum has been the word. That was until this week, which is timely and definitely not coincidental because Stellantis also had some earnings reports for 2024 released this week as well. Stellantis' 2024 results were bleak, with a 17% decline in net revenue and a 70% decline in net profit, which Stellantis attributes to product offering gaps and aggressive inventory reduction efforts. And while these earnings results certainly aren't shocking or a surprise in any way, it doesn't change the fact that it's really not good news for the company. And for Stellantis, there is some additional added pressure here due to the fact that Stellantis has already had an increasingly strained relationship on the union group that builds their cars, the UAW. But with these new 2024 results, the UAW is no doubt going to be even more pissed with the company than they already were, because it looks as though 2024 profit-sharing checks are only going to be about $3,780, which is a steep drop from the $13,860 that they saw in 2023, and far behind competitors in the space like General Motors, which paid out $14,500 in profit-sharing checks, or Ford, which paid out $10,208 in profit-sharing checks. Now, this is all a reflection of 2024 data, and as we know and as we've discussed throughout this video, 2024 was a rough year for the company. But now we're in 2025. It's a fresh start for the brand. They're going to be having a new CEO. Things should be looking up, right? Well, you'd be wrong, because upon the release of 2024 data, Stellantis has also begun to set expectations for 2025, and they've essentially stated that 2025 will be more of the same from 2024. Again, this is definitely not good news for the company, but as I've mentioned multiple times in this video thus far, it isn't exactly unexpected either, because Stellantis is in such a dire place right now, and they have been for the last year, that their turnaround was never going to be a quick one. And while 2025 should and hopefully will see some improvements with Stellantis throughout the year, we're not going to see that reflected in their financials very much at all. Between brand shakeups, CEO resignations, and just lackluster financials, it's going to take some time to turn Stellantis around. And this sort of brings us to the pivot of the conversation, which is the steps that Stellantis needs to take in order to see this potential turnaround. And one of these steps that has continuously been mentioned is the idea of killing off or axing one of the brands under their umbrella. Stellantis has a ton of brands under their ownership, and many of these brands really aren't doing that well. Jeep delivered 12% less cars in 2024 compared to 2023. Fiat dropped in deliveries by 11.11%. Maserati saw a decline in both revenue and deliveries, and Chrysler has basically evaporated. The point is, their brands aren't doing great. Well, I had mentioned earlier in the video that last summer there were rumors spinning around that Stellantis was considering cutting out one or some of their brands. But then just a few months later, Stellantis denied that this was even a discussion being had. But as of today, according to multiple reports, it seems as though cutting brands is at the very least being discussed and is on the table for Stellantis. And that when interviewing new CEOs for the company, discussions on how these prospects may approach cutting brands and thinning their lineup is part of the interview process. with the new CEO of the company being tasked with determining what brands under the Stellantis umbrella have a viable future. Now, you can see here a graph courtesy of Automotive News, and this graph shows the sales breakdowns of all of the brands under Stellantis. And if you look at this graph, in my opinion, you can very clearly see, or at least get an idea of what brands Stellantis may be considering to give the axe versus which ones are more than likely safe. Now, obviously, brands like Peugeot and Fiat, which both make up 20% of Stellantis sales, they're safe. I also think Jeep and Ram are going to be safe as well. Honestly, I think any brand that makes up nearly 10% of sales are probably safe. But I absolutely do have my suspicions on which brands I do think are more likely to get the axe and which brands may end up getting some shakeups. Maserati to me is an obvious one. Not only is this brand sort of an outlier segment for Stellantis, they make up very few sales for the brand, and Maserati sales took a nosedive in 2024 with a decline of deliveries of 57%. Maserati sold less cars in 2024 compared to Ferrari, which is a more niche and more expensive car, and all things considered, Maserati should be selling a lot more than a brand like Ferrari, but they simply aren't, which really goes to show how much Maserati is struggling in present day. And I believe that Maserati has a uniquely bad problem. Their reliability is terrible, their depreciation is some of the worst in the automotive industry, and no one wants to buy them. This is a really bad place to be in, and it is an obvious choice to skin the fat for Stellantis. Now, I don't think that Maserati will just simply die and go away. I predict that Stellantis will sell it to another automaker, though I don't really have any idea on who would necessarily want to buy it. But I would be extremely surprised if Maserati just disappeared, though I wouldn't be surprised at all if Stellantis gave it the axe. Another brand that I think could easily be addressed in this shakeup from Stellantis is Chrysler. Now, Chrysler did make up 3% of Stellantis sales, which is actually more than I would have thought. However, Chrysler is barely a brand now, and they're basically just a model of the Pacifica. I've been saying this for a long time, and I've said it in some of my videos in the past. To me, it makes no sense for Chrysler to have an entire nameplate basically designated to the Pacifica. And the only way that I think it makes sense to keep the Chrysler nameplate is if they were to expand the brand outwards, but as far as I can tell, there doesn't really seem to be plans to do that. Which means that keeping Chrysler and the Pacifica the way that it is today, it just doesn't make strategic sense. And while I don't think that Chrysler or the Pacifica will just simply disappear, I could see them merging Chrysler with another brand, either under the Stellantis umbrella or selling it to another automaker that may do the same. For example, I think potentially merging Chrysler with Dodge would make a lot of sense. But this is something that I've been saying for about a year now, so who knows, I could be completely off the mark. To be honest though, I think any brand under Stellantis that makes up 1% or less of sales are obvious contenders to get the axe. But again, I would personally be surprised if we didn't see shakeups with at least Maserati and Chrysler, because I do think that something needs to be done with these brands, and there are obvious choices to be addressed. Not only do these brands have declining sales, but they also sort of sit awkwardly within the Stellantis lineup. And in my opinion, I think both of these brands are sort of going through an identity crisis, with Chrysler being a single model brand at this point, and Maserati being a brand that is falling in almost every metric: reliability, value, popularity. It's a bad place to be in. But regardless of who takes over as CEO or which brands they decide to axe, there is one thing that is almost certain with the company, and that is we can expect some major shakeups in 2025, because the company has to do this in order to survive. And I'm personally looking forward to and very interested in seeing what happens with the company in the next year. Like always, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.